Don't let the cats loose in here. Hi, Mickey. I'm live. Sunday morning live. Morning, and welcome to Sunday morning Bible study. Today we're going to actually conclude our study on Kingdom in Exile to the Kingdom of Christ. When did we start this study? April? Easter. Yeah, we started in Daniel. We went through Ezra, Haggai, Zechariah. Now we're in Nehemiah. We could actually go into Esther and Malachi if we wanted to, but we're not going to. We're going to go actually kind of bridge the gap from here into the New Testament, and we're going to start looking at the prophecies of the Christ. They had them. Why didn't they see it when you get to Christ himself? Why didn't they see it? And they've had this stuff in their hands for hundreds and thousands of years. And I think even today's lesson will kind of lead up to that. You'll see some corruption in the priests. The people who should be studying God's Word and seeing the future, they are looking at something else. That's what we'll see. And I think that really rolls into the New Testament. They'd use any excuse in the book to deny that Jesus was the Son of God. So we'll get into that when that gets there. We'll look at Nehemiah 12. Nehemiah 12, by and large, it's just a set of facts, and I'm going to kind of buzz through this. I'm going to offer chocolate for anybody who wants to read some Hebrew names. Anybody want to try? No. Chuck's going to have to stumble on that later. These are the priests and the Levites who came up with Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, and there's a bunch of names right there. These are the chiefs of the priests and of their brothers in the day of Jeshua. It's the Hans Wavi method. You just wave your hand over it, and there it goes. I could read those names, but I wouldn't get a single one of them right anyway. So you can read those on your own. Who was Zerubbabel? You might remember who he was? Huh? Chuck remembers. We got a Snickers, if you can tell me, a Snickers with the letter C on it. If you can tell me whatever you know about Zerubbabel. I had to look him up again. It's like, I know, but it's like, what exactly?
Well, Zerubbabel was the one who originally came to rebuild the temple. Yep. And got him going in the direction of rebuilding the temple. Got as far as the foundation. I don't need a Snickers.
Okay.
He got a foundation for decades, and then they just kind of stopped. And then they got Ezra kind of lit a fire under him, and they got it done.
Yeah, that's it. Zerubbabel came from Babylon. His name actually means from Babylon. That's basically what his name means. He came. He led that process in the rebuilding the temple. He built the foundation, and they got derailed. So, and that's what we remember about him. Haggai 1:1 is part of it. Second year of Darius the king, 6th month, first day. The word of the Lord came by hand of Haggai the prophet to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Skip 14. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people. And they came and worked on the house of the Lord of hosts, their God. So he moved by God, moved by the word of God to start that effort after the exile. The text continues. Well, actually, it started out. These are the chief priests. That's kind of who the names were. That's who the people were. Picking up in verse 8, and the Levites, Jeshua, Benui, all those guys. So they list the chief priests and they list the Levite families who returned from Babylon with Zerubbabel. These are the people that came at that time. Picking up verse 10, and Jeshua was the father of Joachim, the father of Eliashib the father of Joada, the father of Jonathan, and Jonathan the father of Jaddua. Yeah, I probably got 2 of those right. Who knows? This is kind of parenthetical. These are the names of the high priests through this time frame. After exile, these are the names of them. These are who they were. It kind of puts a chronology so you know where you're at. Apparently, there's a big feud over the last name, Jaddua. I'm not getting into that. If you want to find feuds, look into theologists. Sometimes I think theologists don't even know who God is or don't believe in him. So we're going to move on from that. 13 through 21, in the days of Joachim were priests, and a whole list of these guys' names. List of priests, while Joachim was high priest, not whole, but while. So these are some of the priests. These are all the priests, probably. In the days of Eliashib, there's more. Last four high priests are mentioned, a whole bunch of Levites. Down to this, and in the days of Nehemiah the governor, and of Ezra the priest and the scribe. So these are the list of Levites and the last four high priests that were mentioned. I like Kaufman's commentary on this. We shall not discuss these lists in detail. There's a good reason for that. It's sufficient to remember that they served their purpose as far as Nehemiah was concerned. The discrepancies, questions, problems, and variations in all these are insoluble at this period of time, 25 centuries later. That's it. They're important to Nehemiah, and they're important to the Jews that established the bloodline, the history, and all that stuff. It's important in the right context. It will not get me and you one step closer to heaven. So we're just going to move on. So from there. Verse 27, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem, celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgiving, and with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the districts surrounding Jerusalem, from the villages of the Netophathites. Netophathites? I guess so. Also from Beth Gilgal, and from the region of Geba and Asmaveth, from the city. Chuck's laughing, isn't he? And from the singers had built for themselves villages. For the singers had built themselves villages around Jerusalem, and the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and purified the people and the gates and the wall. Purification ceremonies probably included the offering of sacrifices, strict observance of all the prohibitions of the Mosaic law. They'd read the law, that things were going good. They probably kept everything that was in there. And there was a celebration, is basically what it is, for the completion of the wall. The text here doesn't tell us when this happened. Of course, there's a controversy, but anyways, if you go to the non-canonical Second Maccabees, it puts this celebration at 3 months after the completion of the wall. It would be what it is. So, like I said, Second Maccabees is not canon. It's not part of the Bible. There are people who include it in the Bible. We do not. That puts a time frame on it, and that's all it is. The Maccabees are basically books of history, aren't they? So.
Against the Seleucid Empire and reestablished Israel as an independent state for a while till the Romans got there.
Maccabees are about a revolt against the Seleucid Empire and putting Israel back as an independent state. I'll just put that on a microphone that way. So that's the history of that. There's a lot of Old Testament stuff. You'll find references to the Maccabees. New Testament, you do find that too. You find some good references to what's stuff that's included in the Maccabees, or like I said, history and stuff that's included in that. So, anyways, that's about when this happened. And picking up 31, and I brought the leaders of Judah up onto the wall and appointed 2 great choirs and gave thanks. One went to the south on the wall to the dung gate, and after them went Hosea, and half the leaders of Judah, Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, and a bunch of other people. So basically the leaders of Judah went up on top of the wall that was built, and they separated into 2 choirs. They said the wall at that time was probably about 9 foot wide. So it was about, as far as my arms reach, plus 50% more than that. It's about how wide this was. They separated into 2 big choirs. In verse 36-37, and his relatives, these people. Ezra leads one group, one choir, and they go counterclockwise around the city of Jerusalem, singing praise, giving thanks. Nehemiah leads another group, and they basically go clockwise. So the 2 of them, 2 groups basically circle the city of Jerusalem on top of the wall, and they meet up on the north end up by the temple. Is about basically the process of that. And more names here. They offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and the children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. So the 2 choirs meet, and they rejoice. On that day were appointed men over the storerooms, the contributions, the first fruits, and the tithes to gather them into the portions required by the law for the priests and for the Levites according to the fields of the towns. For Judah rejoiced over the priests and the Levites who ministered, and they performed the service of their God and the service of purification, as did the singers and the gatekeepers, according to the command of David and his son Solomon. So where men were appointed to handle the tithes. We also see men are appointed to collect tithes from the outlying areas. We talked about, last week, Chuck talked about the people who were appointed, 1/10 of the people were appointed to live inside the gates, the other ones lived outside. The outside would be where the fields are. It's where they would grow stuff. So that's where that would be. So they have men appointed to handle the tithes, tithe being 1/10. The outside, they went to gather that stuff. So these guys were appointed to take care of that kind of thing. For long ago, in the days of David and Asaph, there were directors of the singers, and there were songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. And all Israel in the days of Zerubbabel and in the days of Nehemiah gave the daily portions of the singers and the gatekeepers. They set apart that which was for the Levites, and the Levites set apart that which was for the son of Aaron. So there's widespread cooperation between the priests and the people. The tithes were offered, tithes were collected, the tithes were used to pay the singers and the gatekeepers and the Levites and the priests. They were everybody together working with this. That's really the key. They were all working to do God's plan all at one time. How does the attitude of Israel at this time compare to the time in Ezra when the temple had stalled out? We talked about when Zerubbabel got there, he started it and it stalled out. People got busy building their own houses and stuff like that. So how do you compare the attitude of Israel at this time compared to that time?
Happy.
Happy. Well, joy was part of that. Let's use that. That's good. You're right. They're happy with God, and they're happy with the whole process. They're doing their share. They're not. All these groups on top of the wall singing.
On top of the wall singing. Can you imagine? They could be heard forever.
Yeah.
Miles and miles away.
That's what it said. It said they could be heard far away. So it's not the whole town hears it as well as far away. Yeah. So you've got that, and they are doing what they should, and they're doing it from their hearts, not because they're being whipped into doing it or threatened or anything. They're just doing it, and it's clicking. As compared to, go ahead, Chuck.
Identity is God's people.
Yeah.
And as an independent group, they were listening to everybody around them. They were listening to the people who were threatening, Tobias and Sanballat and Gershom. Well, I think Gershom was to the south. So you had all those threats and like that, and they were just, if you will, they were overwhelmed by all the things going on around them. And then all of a sudden they got perspective and they said, no, we're God's people. God's for us. And that's when they really started to get some traction, was people got some good leadership and gave them good direction, and they started following God.
That's it. I like your use of the word overwhelmed there, since that leads into your sermon in a little while. So you're right, and they are overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed by meeting the world's standards. He mentions Tobiah, he mentions Sanballat. They're going to get into the story in a little while. The neighbors had influence on them it almost goes back to the Garden of Eden. Surely you will not die. You could eat that fruit. You can do this. You could just forget about it. And things went away. Now with the right leadership and the right purpose, they're back to being, they're reestablished their identity as God's people. And they're acting like God's people. They got a blueprint. They're finally following it. How's the attitude different than in a time like during exile? What did we know about the people of Israel during exile? They didn't do anything much, did they? Did they keep the Feast of Tabernacles? Did they offer the sacrifices? We saw where they opened they blew the dust off the scroll and they read the Pentateuch. It was almost like, what had they done? So this is much different than that. They went 70 years plus, basically, with attitude. What about the time before the exile? What led them to being exiled? What led God's people to being kicked out of their own country, the promised land, to go live in Babylon? Chuck? They became pagans. God's people became some other God's people with a little g. Yeah, like I said, pagans. They worshipped whatever they wanted to worship. They could worship themselves, they could worship time, they could worship money, they could worship, the pagan gods any way they want. Some of their worship was a lot more interesting than the worship of Israel, or the worship of the church that follows. So, yeah, that's kind of what they did, but they became pagans, and God had to deal harshly with his people. What about the time of Jesus? What state was Israel in? What state was the Jewish religion in during Jesus' time? How faithful were the Jews? Chuck?
Heaven because of what you do and who you are.
Yeah, it became a work. You could work your way to heaven. Who you were and what you do was what they thought you could get into heaven with. And they showed that. They got on to Jesus. Did you wash your hands? You're hanging out with sinners. That's what they got on him for, right? Time and time again. They changed it. We're going to look at something on that a little bit. So anyways, chapter 12, with the right leadership and the real right identity, they have become God's people, and they are doing a very good job of doing what they should. They want to, and they are. 13, it gets different. Anyways, verse 1. On that day they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter in the assembly of God. For they did not meet the people of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. Yet our God turned the curse into a blessing. As soon as the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent. So what did the reading of the book do for the people? What did reading of the book of Moses, reading of the history that would be even part of that would be probably Exodus, I imagine. What did it lead the people to do? They got rid of the foreigners. They got rid of the Ammonites. They got rid of the Moabites because that was what God's law said. And they're, like I said, they're working hard to do what God had wanted them to do. Picking up verse 4, now before this, Eliashib, the priest, who was appointed over the chambers of the house of our God, who was related to Tobiah, prepared for Tobiah a large chamber where they had previously put the grain offering, the frankincense, the vessels, and the tithes of grain, wine, and oil, which were given by commandment to the Levites, singers, and gatekeepers, and the contribution to the priests. So right here is where the record scratches. You can hear it, right? You've seen TV shows and movies. It's like things change at this exact moment in the story. They've been doing what they can to be faithful again. And something fishy's happened. Okay? Who was Tobiah? Reaching back a little bit on this one. Anybody remember who Tobiah was? Black or white? Good or bad? Not black or white necessarily, but good or bad? Well, bad. He was bad. Okay. He was the governor of the east. He would have been an Ammonite himself. In Nehemiah 2, then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. And the king had sent me officers of the army and horsemen sent with me. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. So Tobiah and Sanballat were governors, and they were governors over that area, and they were living large, and it really kind of ticked them off that somebody came to look out for the people that they had their thumb on. So he was an Ammonite. He was the regional governor under the king of Persia. He tried to stop the rebuilding of the wall with intimidation, false reports, false prophets, and the influence of nobles. We see that several places through there. He was against God's people being God's people. That's really what he was. So Tobiah, back in our verses we're looking at, Eliashib the high priest, who was appointed over keeping the temple and stuff, he was related to Tobiah, and he prepared for Tobiah a large chamber where they previously held tithes. Why would Tobiah have an apartment, an office, storeroom, meeting space, whatever you wanted to think this room is for? What do you think he needs with that in the temple? You know, you're right. You want a Milky Way? Okay. Man, these are harder to give away than the other kind of candy. So, yeah, it gives him credibility. He's there. He's got an office. He's got a storeroom. I mean, it could be an apartment. We really don't know what it was for, but he can entertain people or whatever. He becomes part of the infrastructure because he's there. Chuck?
Mini court that he holds with the priests that are offering sacrifice.
You can tell me.
You ought to do it this way, you ought to do it that way, whatever it is. You know, the relationship was, I believe, the high priest's son was married to Tobias' daughter.
Yeah. High priest's son is married to Tobias' daughter. Yeah, so he's there. He holds his own court. He can tell the priests what to do. He can tell them how to do stuff. Yeah, he's got a lot of influence. All of a sudden, an outsider has a lot of influence on how the temple is working. He's got an influence on how the Levites work, how the priests work, the whole deal. You know, don't read that scripture that offends me. You know, don't read that part about kicking out the Ammonites and the Moabites because you have to get rid of me. So yeah, this is bad news. In that space, you can almost see letting, I don't know, the president or something have an office right up here. Let him have this, this half the stage the president could have his own office there. Or not necessarily the president, but somebody. But Tobiah basically taking a big chunk. But what was that space that he had? What would that originally have been used for? Offerings. As they went out into the villages and stuff and collected a tenth of their harvest, as they collected a tenth of their income, and they put this in there, the grain, the wine, the oil, and they needed storerooms for this. So that's what used to be in his new area. So what does this tell us? They probably ain't collecting that stuff anymore. Follow the money. I like that. That's a really good answer. You follow the money. The guy who used to be, or probably still is, he's probably king of the area, the governor of that area, he's probably still got part of that job. Nehemiah is the governor over Israel, or Jerusalem, I think. Is it Jerusalem or is it Israel? Judah. He's over governor of Judah. That's right. That's what he is. So Tobiah is probably still governor. So yeah, like you say, you follow the money. The tithes stop happening, and it's going to be tied to him. No, it wasn't a closet. Pretty good size. If you took a tenth of everything that the city of Titusville produced or earned, and collected that, would you need a room the size of this auditorium? Probably. I don't know. Like I say, it wouldn't have been small. He had a good chunk of real estate there. Verse 6, while this was taking place, I was not in Jerusalem. So Nehemiah was not in Jerusalem at this time. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I went to the king. And after time, I asked leave of the king and came to Jerusalem. And then I discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah, preparing for him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. So Nehemiah's gone. He's gone to Babylon to see the king. He comes back and he finds this going on. And I was very angry, and I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I gave orders, and they cleansed the chambers, and I brought back there the vessels of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. So this is Nehemiah's thing. He comes in here, it's like, what is going on? And he starts grabbing couch, throw it out. Table, throw it out. His bed, throw this stuff out. He throws this out and he gets these guys, bring in the Clorox, bring in the, we're going to clean this out. We don't want his fingerprints in here. This place has been defiled by having him in here. Clean this out. Start bringing back in the tithes. Bring that stuff back in here. So you almost, to me, this, and there's another scene, You start seeing like Jesus when he clears the temple courts with the money lenders, the money changers. He gets so upset, he flips the tables up, sets the birds free, all that kind of stuff. You can see this, he's angry. I mean, it flat out says he's mad. He's not just, yeah, boys, you can't do this. No, he's grabbing stuff by hand and throwing it out to get things straightened again. Verse 10, I also found out the portions of the Levites had not been given to them, so that the Levites and the singers who did the work had fled each to his field. As we suspected, the tithes had stopped. Levites and the singers, they left the temple. They went out to the outskirts. They went to the out areas to get jobs. They had to feed themselves. Why? From what we've seen, why would you think the tithes had stopped? Like Paul said, you follow the money. So you give 10% to the temple. What have they been doing with that money? What have they been doing with that grain? They weren't feeding them. They weren't feeding the singers. They weren't feeding the Levites. They were feeding Tobias. They were feeding Tobiah's friends or whatever. That's where the money was going. The corruption had, although you were ready to be faithful giving, you saw the corruption that's going on there, and it's like, they're wasting my stuff. There's corruption there. There's corruption in the high priest. So they just stopped. There's no sense in giving this because it ain't getting to God. It's not going to the purpose that it's supposed to. So this is what they see. And it makes sense. It makes sense. Verse 11, so I confronted the officials and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and sent them to their stations. So the priests. The priests are who is at fault. This whole system is falling apart because of the priests, the one who are supposed to be responsible for it. Verse 12, then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain, wine, and oil into the storehouses. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouses Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, and Pedaiah of the Levites, and of their assistant Hanan the son of Zachor, son of Mattaniah. For they were considered reliable, and their duty was to distribute to their brothers. So he corrects the corruption, the tithes resume, they appoint men over this. Here, you're trustworthy, we're going to keep you guys watching over this to make sure that it continues to work. Bring the tithes in, distribute them as needed, or as necessary, as it's supposed to. Verse 14, remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my Lord for his services. This is Nehemiah's plea. Nehemiah pleads to God, dear Lord, remember me. Remember what I've done for you. Remember what I've done for the house of you. For all this garbage that just happened here, don't count this on me. I didn't bring him in. I didn't cut the tithes. Remember me for what I've done. Is this understandable? Is this a legitimate prayer? It's probably fair. It's probably fair. It's not all his fault. Chuck?
Perspective, he may have felt like maybe it's my fault I didn't come back soon enough. But God knows what's on Nehemiah's heart. He didn't really need to say, I didn't wipe out my deeds. He knew he wasn't responsible. But as he got back, he fixed it. Yeah, God would have known. He's not responsible. He went to Artaxerxes basically probably to report, here, you sent me over there to do a job, and this is how well things are working out right now. I mean, they had a close relationship.
Yeah, a good relationship. It's not just so do your own thing. I'm sure, reports have gotten back, but he went back to probably report. Like I said, God, Artaxerxes is part of this in that aspect. God has put it on his heart to let this happen, make this happen. So yeah, he's not going to be held accountable for all this. But it happens, and he cleans stuff up pretty quick. We can see it. It's still recorded for us to see. Verse 15, in those days I saw in Judah people treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, also wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, which were brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day that when they sold food. Tyrians also, who lived in the city, brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath and to the people of Judah and Jerusalem itself, with an exclamation point. There's no punctuation in Hebrew, but anyways. This is what he saw. We just had the problem with the foreign governor has got an office in the temple. Now what else is he seeing that's an issue, a problem? Are they keeping the Sabbath? Not even close. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. They're working on the Sabbath. If they're working on the Sabbath, what are they not doing? Yeah. They've forgotten about God entirely. They didn't take that time. Didn't keep it holy. So they've got a little bit of everything going on. What do you think brought this on? What do you think brought on the breaking of the Sabbath? Chuck?
Cut out worship because everybody, you don't feed them. There's nobody there to attend. There's no singers. There's none of that that's going on in the temple. So people got away from God again.
Yeah. Tobiah, basically, his issue, it cut off like I say, the singers, the servants, the people got away from God. They just didn't. So it was easy. They forgot in a heartbeat. They forgot. There's also, I got that in there or not? Nope. It talks about the Tyrians. Tyrians were foreigners. They're allowed to live in the city. There's apparently no law against that. But they may have weakened that too. They may have been people that they didn't worship God. So, they're working, they're bringing in fish. It's easy to influence other people. Chuck?
It would have been Tyre, right?
Yeah.
Tyre and Sidon up to the northwest.
Lebanon area had been when those people were from, living in Jerusalem. But they've got their influence and they're continuing to work. They're not held to the Sabbath. But what they're doing, it just makes it easy for people to say, they're doing this, so, and it weakens everything else. That the people of Jerusalem kind of fell into that same trap. 17, then I confronted the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this evil thing that you're doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers act this way? Did not our God bring all this disaster on us and this city? Now you are bringing more wrath on Israel for profaning the Sabbath. So he points back to, they had this before the exile. They brought in the Babylonians to conquer us. We went away from here for a long time. They destroyed the temple and they destroyed our people. And who does he blame this on? It says, what's that?
Leadership.
Yeah, it's the leader's fault. It says the nobles of Judah, the priests are pointed out as being a part of this, but I'm going to say, the leadership and stuff, it's all tied together. The government and the church, the government and Judaism are tied together. They're all one. So it's all tied to that. It just didn't happen. God did to us last time. This has got to be fixed. As soon as it began to grow dark at the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut. Gave orders that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And I stationed some of my servants at the gates that no load should be brought in on the Sabbath day. Jewish timekeeping the day starts when the sun goes down. Is that right? That's what I understand. The Jewish timekeeping, the day starts when the sun goes down. So on Friday, at 5:30 right now, on the Sabbath would start. So what he said is it starts to grow dark, they would close the gates. We're not bringing in fish. We're not bringing in crops. Business stops. It ain't coming in. This is a reform that Nehemiah put in place to stop people violating the Sabbath. If you don't have import-export, you don't have that business going on. There's not as much of a need for it. Then the merchants and the sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside of Jerusalem once or twice. As business is, it's smarter than that. They found a way to proceed. If you can't do business inside the gates, we'll set up a flea market outside the gates, you know. That's what they did. What do you think they hoped to accomplish with that? You probably take the people from the outside. They would still be able to do business with them, whether it's bringing stuff in that, you know, Sunday when the gates back open again, we move it on in, or you can still do business with the people from the outside that still have things to buy or sell. But I warned them and said to them, why do you lodge outside the wall? If you do so again, I'll lay hands on you. From that time, they did not. This is kind of turned, like I said, we said Tobiah and Sanballat, and they threatened the Israelites. You know, you keep working on the wall, we're going to kill you. We're going to hurt you. So Nehemiah says that he turns out the tables back on, you know, that if you keep this up, I'll get involved. I don't know what an old man's going to do, but he's already done some crazy stuff, so we'll give him credit for that. He threatens the merchants, and they stop. All right, we'll stop. 22, then I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come and guard the gates to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember this also, my favor, O my God, and spare me according to the greatness of your steadfast love. So you have another plea from Nehemiah. He gets the Levites involved, purify yourselves, help keep the Sabbath holy. But he makes another plea to God. What did Nehemiah acknowledge that his salvation depended on? God's love. It's not about what he's done. It's not about who he was. He acknowledges that God's love is what will save him. His salvation purely depends on God's love. And that's the difference, like we talked about a little while ago. The Jews would talk about the law and keeping the law, which none of them could keep. The Jews in the New Testament, it was still about what you could do and who you were. But this starts pointing towards Christ. It's no longer about what you get done. It's no longer about how you check each box. It's no longer about who you are. It's all about God's love. It's the only thing that saves you. And Nehemiah acknowledges it right here. 23, in those days also I saw the Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half their children spoke the languages of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah, but only the language of each people. So what other problem did Nehemiah see in Jerusalem? The kids were no longer Israelites. They weren't speaking the language. They weren't what they were supposed to be. We saw this addressed in Ezra 9 and 10. They read the law. They said, you know, we're not supposed to have the foreign wives, the Canaanite wives, and they put them off. They had a whole court proceeding to still take care of the families. But that process, they went through that 25 years ago to get rid of the Canaanite wives who were an influence on dragging the men, dragging the families away from God's way. It's the purpose behind that always, is the fact that the pagans will drag away God's people. So it's already been addressed. How long does it take to raise a bunch of kids who speak a different language than the local language? How long does it take? Can you do it in a year? No. What's that? One generation will basically do it. You're right. Everybody has kids. They raise them up in the neighborhood. And it's not just one family. If my kids speak the language I have at home, they speak to me. I had a kid on my soccer team. His family's Lebanese. When he talks to the family, he talks in Arabic. Unless it's for everybody to hear, he speaks in English. I don't speak Arabic. So he doesn't speak Arabic to me, you know. There's kids that speak Spanish and English. They speak Spanish. I know Colombian kids. Their families are big on keeping that tradition, keeping the Spanish, but they keep it at home. You might get a pocket of families that they learn to speak a little mix of this stuff or whatever, but you don't influence everybody until it gets more and more. Yeah, easily a generation to get this to happen. It's taken time that they've gotten away from the Hebrew and they've gotten into the language of Ashdod. They've changed. I know I don't know where it's at, but I know in the New Testament they don't speak Hebrew and they speak Aramaic, Greek. They speak Greek, they speak Aramaic. The Greeks, because
You spoke Greek. You spent Greek money. You respected Greek culture. They imprinted Greece totally on the people they were over.
yeah, so they got Greek, but they've got Latin. They work with that. But Aramaic is Koine Greek. That's what it is. It's Koine Greek. That's right. It's Greek. So they're speaking another language because it's been impressed on them. But they seem to, I think I've read that they forgot how to do Hebrew. So, but I don't know where it's at. I didn't look hard enough to find that. Picking up towards 25, see what I can finish off with. And I confronted them and cursed them and beat them and pulled out their hair. See, he pitches another fit. And I made them take an oath in the name of God, saying, you shall not give your daughters to the sons, or take the daughters for your sons for yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin on account of such women? Among the many nations there was no king like him. He was beloved by his God. God made him king over Israel. Nevertheless, foreign women made him even to sin. Shall we then listen to you and do all this great evil and act treacherously against our God by marrying foreign women? Nehemiah confronts the offenders. He curses them, explains the problem. I like the part about them pulling out their hair. It's almost really, it's like a penalty, but it's like, so you're walking around, did they cut in their hair, did they yank out a big chunk of it? But you would know, these are offenders. Anyways, it's almost funny. In verse 28, and one of the sons of Jehoiada, son of Eliashib, the high priest, was the son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Chuck alluded to that earlier. Even the high priest is guilty of this. His family has intermarried with the pagans. Therefore I chased him from me. So Nehemiah chases away that. I'm assuming Eliashib himself. How deep is the problem? Clear to the top. Clear to the top. 29, remember then, O my God, remember them, O my God, because they have desecrated the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. There's a third plea from Nehemiah. This is their fault. It's been internal. The priests and stuff they've desecrated this. Malachi, when you get to that, one verse basically, and it points out, and now, O priests, this commands for you. This is God's words. If you will not listen, I will not take it to heart to give honor to my name. If you will not take it to heart to give honor to my name, says the Lord of hosts, then I will send a curse upon you, and I will curse your blessings. Indeed, I have already cursed them because you do not lay it to your heart. Behold, I will rebuke your offspring and spread dung on your faces, the dung of your offerings, and you shall be taken away from it. God curses the priests for their ineptitude. I guess it's worse than that. For them turning their back on God and not doing His will with theirs. Picking it back up in 30. Thus I cleansed them from everything foreign, and I established the duties of the priests and Levites, each in his work, and I provided for the wood offering at appointed times and for the first fruits. So there's another reform that Nehemiah puts in, and he finishes off with, remember me, O my God, for good. This concludes the book of Nehemiah. This is how he finishes off. Remember me. Remember me for God. Good. You see them getting away. They follow anything and everything which will tear them away from God's will. And that's really the key to this. The influence from the outsiders, the influence of those who don't know God, tears away from those who do. Those who are supposed to keep His commandments, those who are supposed to pass it on to the next generation. Those who are supposed to keep a bloodline pure enough to bring a Christ. The salvation of the Son of God will come through the bloodline that goes back to David. It goes back to Abraham. It goes back to Adam, of course. But, it goes back. It's a pure bloodline of God's people. And you have to keep that. And as we see, the people get smaller and smaller, and it gets to be a remnant. It gets to be a thread. That's basically what it is. And Jesus will come from that thread. And that's really where it's at. So next week, we're going to start looking at Christ prophesied. So Chuck has come up with a list of approximately 400 prophecies. He's found a list of 350. We will not cover one prophecy a week. But anyways, we're going to look at the prophecies, what they should have seen and how they should have been looking. When Jesus came, they should have looked at Him and saw that He was the Son of God. They should have looked at Him as being the salvation rather than the way He was treated. As you know the story, they had to kill Him to get him out of the way because it went against everything that the Sanhedrin wanted for themselves. So encourage you to join us with that. Thank you. I didn't give away much chocolate. If you want some, because I didn't have a whole lot of input this time, if you want one, let me know. So, all right, thanks.